Good evening. The school committee workshop business executive session of March 25th, 2024 will now come to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Ryan DiZoglio. Mary Beth Donovan. Lori Keegan.
Present.
Kristen Maxwell.
Here.
Daniel Shabilia.
Present.
Kenneth Willett.
Here.
Mayor Neil Perry.
Here. Thank you all. May I have a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by member Willett, seconded by member Shabilia. Discussion. I'm on my game tonight, MB. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, hearing none. All those in favor? Oh, we don't have somebody here. Do we have to go roll without him here? No? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thank you, that carries. Excellent. Now move on to the flag salute. Are we doing it on our own? That's okay. Helps us stay in practice. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Has anyone signed up for public participation? No. All right, that makes this nice and short. At this time, we will close the public participation. Just a reminder, if you can't make the meeting in person for public participation, you can always send an email to Martha Sorois at masorois@methuen.k12.ma.us before 3 p.m. on the day of the school committee meeting. And Martha, thank God you didn't watch last week because I completely screwed up and I said your predecessor's name and I was like, what the heck, yeah. All right. May I have a motion and a second to approve the Cooperstown baseball trip?
So moved. Second.
Moved by member Willett, seconded by member Shabilia. Discussion? Why don't we call the coach up and have him take us through the process? Welcome, coach.
Thank you very much. So this has been mentioned, I believe, a month or two ago. So we'll just kind of have some finalization of the itinerary, just so everybody understands that on Saturday, April 20th, the bus will depart from Methuen High School. We'll take the roughly 4 or 5 or 6 hour journey out to New York, to Cooperstown, check into the hotel. It's the Holiday Inn Express. It's about 2 miles away from Doubleday Field. They'll have a team dinner. And then on Sunday, they'll wake up, team breakfast. They go to a Doubleday Field. They play a game versus Lowell. They have lunch, and then they come back. So this, the coaches and chaperones are all listed on the stuff I gave you. And all costs will be paid via fundraiser. The Melia family has stepped up to support the program. Our alumni game is dedicated to Devin Melia, and his family wanted to use the opportunity to give back to the program that gave so much to their son. Devin loved his trip to Cooperstown when he was playing baseball, which is how this trip started to come together. They are raising funds in connection with our alumni game to send our team to Cooperstown. They've established an official account to raise funds, and we'll write a check for the total to the Methuen High School athletics. That was, Coach wanted me to read that, so it's all going to be funded by the Melia Foundation.
Outstanding. Any questions from the committee?
Just one.
Member Shabilia.
How can people find out about donating to the committee? Where are there events? Where can we go for information so folks can help out if they want?
So I think they can, there is a continued hope that they're going to continue to run that alumni baseball game, so I would look for that, ways to donate for that. Other than that, I will have to kind of get back to you.
All right,
In
fair
terms
enough.
of, but I think that there is going to be an alumni game again, and so they do post that on social media, and I've seen that a bunch of times. I almost volunteered to umpire that game last year. I might have to do it again this year. See if they actually hit me up for it, but anyways, so there'll be information regarding that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Hearing and seeing none. Okay, there's a motion on the floor to approve. All of us in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Carries unanimously. Thank you, Coach. Enjoy the trip. Oh, now I got to do something. Huh? All right, may I have a motion and a second to approve the energy proposal for 9 Branch Street and Marsh Lower School?
So moved.
Moved by member Willett,
Second.
seconded by member Keegan, Vice Chair Keegan, excuse me. Any discussion? We want to Did you guys want to make a little discussion first?
Yeah, just real quick. As I'd mentioned to you, the last couple of meetings, we had an energy upgrade over at the Marsh Upper School.
Yep.
Where we've upgraded some of the systems to make it more efficient, easier to manage, et cetera. That just completed. We just finished paying for it out of the IVAC grant. Now, we've asked them to do the work to look at Marsh Lower School, so we can finish up that building, as well as looking at the Branch Street to see how we can make energy upgrades there as well. So I've asked them to come here and talk about the proposals, probably answer your questions more intelligently than I can about HVAC. This is Brad Passons and Rich Finn from FMC, and I'll hand it over to them.
Hey, everybody. My name is Rich Finn with Energy Source. We're essentially a contractor for both National Grid and Eversource. We do a lot of work with FMC Technologies in terms of building automation. So as Ian said, we just finished a project up at the Marsh School. So we have proposals together for second phase of Marsh School as well as the 9 Branch Street facility. Projects have been submitted to both Eversource and National Grid. They've reviewed the projects and approved incentives towards those projects. So they're teed up and ready to go. Now, if you have any specific questions,
Questions from the committee?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Member Willett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the warranty process, it looked pretty standard in terms of the labor and the one-year warranty. Beyond that, it reverts to standard warranties. Do we have a sense from the manufacturers, like if someone installs a roof, they guarantee it sometimes for 15, 20 years. Do you have a sense from the industry what the standard warranty would entail for the manufacturers of the products, just to get a sense of it?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Brad Parsons. Thanks for having us. I'm with FMC Technologies over in Chelmsford. We've been around for about 25 years, and we just do building automation systems. So we were selected by Energy Source to do the work here. We already did Marsh Upper School. But specific to your question, the standard in the industry is 1 year materials, 1 year labor. And that's what we have here as well. So if there's an issue with a component, it would get replaced. If there's an issue with the workmanship, we come back and do fix any workmanship issues. And the type of components we're talking about here are smaller control components that, for instance, at the Marsh Lower School, you have a lot of old unit vents around the perimeter in the classrooms and some other HVAC equipment like fan coil units. And now they have these really old controls that are way outdated, no longer supported by the manufacturer, and it makes it so the equipment doesn't work so well and it's hard for the staff to maintain it. So the objective then is to go in and replace these old controls. There's little control boards in these unit vents that we go in and replace them. And we'd also implement some strategies. The strategies for energy efficiency and even more importantly to improve the indoor air quality for the kids and the teachers. What we do is we'll monitor the indoor air quality and the CO2 within, say, the classrooms. And then based upon the levels of CO2, we can open up the outdoor air dampers that are in those unit vents and bring in more fresh air. The old controls just really weren't able to do much of anything. So the unit vents themselves can stay in place, the fan coil units and that equipment can stay in place, but we're able to kind of make it perform better with the new controls. And utility company gives really good incentives if you do these strategies, and that's what we're going to implement like we did at the Marsh Upper School. The other thing I'll say is the old controls were all proprietary. They're put in by companies, and they had to buy their equipment, hire them to do the work, even to maintain it. Since then, now the industry's open. Everyone's happy about that. So the equipment we put in can be maintained by us. We have a really good service organization, but It could also be maintained by anybody else who's qualified to, work on building automation systems. So the controls components can actually get most of this stuff over the counter at FW Web or someone like that, right? So you don't have to go to the factory and, pay these outrageous prices for proprietary equipment. So that, everyone was aware, that's why we're in the position where we do open systems and good workmanship. And the plan here looks like a great plan to do both the Marsh Lower School and 9 Branch Street. Questions?
Member Donovan?
So according to the proposal here, work has to be completed by September 2024 in order to receive the incentives. When would you see the actual work happening, and how would that impact? If it's not during the summer, how disruptive would that be to learning?
Yep. So it takes 4 to 6 weeks to do each project. We would get it done during the summer. We're busy during the summer, we're scrambling, but we'll get it done. We have our own installers. Sometimes we bring on some supporting third-party folks we work with. But ideally, we'd like to get going as soon as we can and even get a jump start on some of this during April vacation. Most of the equipment, the components are off the shelf. We have in stock as well, so we can get it done by then. I know that if things, for some reason, there's an issue, we can probably get an extension from the utility company, to tell you the truth. But it's got to be by the end of the year for sure, but that's not even, as far as we're concerned, we can get the work done in time before that deadline, no problem. But we do want to get moving soon.
Member Shabilia?
So focusing on Branch Street,
Okay.
which is a little discouraging considering we just bought the building. The units that are up there, you said they're no longer supported, but otherwise in good working order? Is it just this piece, and is it lack of maintenance or just outdated?
So that system probably went in the 90s or something like that, right?
So it's
And
got a
it-
15-year life cycle?
Yeah, at the very most. And these components, they were old Johnson Controls controllers, and they stopped being supported by the manufacturer in it was like 2003 or something. Like so long ago, it's ridiculous. And, they're quality enough that they've been working. But what you have there, you don't have the unit vents, you have the VAV boxes in the ceiling, and there's a damper in there to open and close to let in conditioned air, based upon the temperature. And a lot of those, we used to, we went and looked at them, a lot of them aren't working. That the control component that makes that damper move is broken. So you're not really getting any good. So what we do is the actual mechanical box itself in there with the damper is okay, it's fine. So we'll take off that old controller, put on a new one with an actuator built into it. And then we replace the thermostats with new thermostats, put in some CO2 sensors, and get it back working the way it should be.
So maybe for you folks, maybe for Mr. Gosling, do we have, there's nothing in here about a maintenance plan going forward, and any HVAC project I've done in a residential setting, there was always a purchase part of a ongoing maintenance. I assume that there's something you folks recommend on how we manage this to keep it going for the next, this one got almost 40 years out of it?
Yeah.
So I'd like the next one to go that long too.
We offer service agreements, and like I said, it doesn't have to be us, but, a service agreement, typically the way it works is, for us, we have people at our office, if there's an issue, they would call, and we try to fix things remotely. If it's just kind of a question, things don't seem to be working, do a little investigating. If that doesn't work, we'd roll a van or have a truck come out and someone look at what the problem is and correct it. So typically we would propose a service agreement. We don't typically do it up front, these projects, but we certainly can. And, the terms are available. It's usually, annual service agreement, couple days, someone on site for preventative, and remote support is usually, sufficient to keep these things working.
And one last question. The rate on this, the 200K number, it looks like it's pre-approved by National Grid to be on the prorated over 5 years. Is there an interest rate for that? Nothing was stated in the National Grid.
Yeah, it's interest-free. They call it on-bill repayment, but it's interest-free for up to 5 years.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. That's it. Thank you.
So I just have one question, it's actually for you, not for, so thank you. Very good.
Good? Okay,
I'm
thanks.
assuming this is a response to an RFP? Yes? No. No? So what is this?
This falls under what is it, chapter?
25A. Yeah.
So-
Probably speak to that.
Yeah, you want to speak to the,
Go ahead.
So essentially, as a contractor to National Grid and Eversource, we went through a bidding process to be what they call a project expediter.
Yeah.
So Chapter 25A basically allows you to do projects up to $300,000 without going out to bid.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. It would still have to go before city council, though, for a vote.
It will do, yeah, for the
Okay.
onboard billing.
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Yep, appreciate it.
Yep.
Now, actually, before you said, so the one thing that Dan mentioned that I saw is, on the clarifications, we've not included repairs to existing HVAC or control devices scheduled to remain. So how does that work, where you're gonna be replacing some, and you're not gonna be replacing others? I just don't want us to get into the world of, chasing lost cats, right?
Right.
So,
right.
we call you and you say, oh, the device is working fine, right? Now we gotta kinda hunt
So-
down the,
Yeah, it's a good point, but actually, we're replacing all the controls components. Right?
Thank
It's
you.
kind of a blanket statement. And then, but, if there's mechanical, like I said, the VAV boxes themselves and the unit vents, that's mechanical equipment. Sometimes we do find some issues with the damper, something, and what we'll report back and say, hey, you might want to get a
Might
mechanical
wanna-
company,
yeah.
not us, to correct those things. But we didn't see anything major.
yep, thank you.
I just want to make one comment. I think you brought up a good point, Mayor. The way this all started was actually getting all departments on the same page, meaning we had these folks come, we had our maintenance staff, we had our technology staff, because of that exact reason, right? What is the best way? Our current platforms, technology doesn't always talk to what should be talking to, so this is really what got us moving. We had big sites, I think, 2 years ago to do this in the entire district.
Yeah.
This is massive in the district our size, so we're trying to do this pieces at a time.
Yeah.
To not feel the amount of cost and having it be a bill on site, what's it called? On bill, sorry, yes, the on bill part
Yeah.
so we're not paying all up front at once, it's part of our billing system is also what was a non-negotiable for us,
Got it,
yeah,
appreciate that.
yep.
Thank you. Anything else from the committee? Ready to vote? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The ayes carry unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate that. I'm gonna stop flipping through my package and look at the notes. Superintendent, would you please start the report out for strategies for district improvement plan year 3, quarter 3?
Yes, thank you. So this is a quick turnaround time, because we did this a month ago, but we told you we would do this, because we were behind. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Golubsky. We have Mr. Crocker here, too, so we're really focusing on 2 and 3. There was some information that I think we're adding to this that would, I think, is helpful to the school committee and to us for Goal 3. And Dr. Golubsky is also going to update a few things that have come to light that we didn't have when we were able to communicate Objective 1. So while the focus is 2 and 3 tonight, because we did a lot of our work with Objective 1, she is going to update you on some new data, new information for Objective 1, and then we'll move into, again, 2 and 3, and Mr. Crocker's here to talk more about the data for number 2. Without further ado, Dr. Golubsky.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
So as Dr. Kwong said, this is our quarter 3 update. And whereas last time we talked, we went over the screener scores, we have new information from Objective 1. which is our literacy objective that may be of interest to you. So in early February, we had TNTP come through and visit our classrooms again. So as you recall, TNTP is our partner consultants who we originally met through the GLEAM grant, which focused on grades 6 through 12. We've since expanded our partnership with them to span grades 3 through 5 as well. So in February, we visited 48 grade 3 through 5 ELA classrooms and 21 grade 6 through 8 classrooms and 11 grade 9 through 12 classrooms. We enjoy these visits because the administrative teams at each building join us along with the consultants, and we debrief after each visit. So as a reminder, these are the 3 core actions that TNTP focuses on, which is in line with our philosophy. So the first is that we're looking for lessons to be focused on high-quality texts. The second is that we're looking for lessons to employ questions and tasks that integrate the standards while also building students' comprehension of text and its meaning. So content knowledge is important to us there as well. And when we talk about the standards, we're looking for grade level standards. In core action 3, we're looking at our students doing the thinking in the classroom. So not just doing the work, but are they being challenged to think critically? So TNTP, after visiting the classrooms and collecting samples of student work, they get back to us with a report. And so these are some of the findings from their report. And so they title this The Bright Spots. So in grades 3 through 8, so at our K through 8 buildings, they saw that students spend time in the text, student engagement is high, students work together in pairs or groups on tasks that are largely text dependent, most students respond with content instead of skill, and students have access to exemplars to make expectations concrete. So I'll say with that second last bullet, most students respond with content instead of skill. It may sound a little funny. When TNTP first came through this year and they would ask students, what are you working on? What are you learning? They'd often respond with what they were doing. I'm writing an essay. I'm writing a sentence. I'm answering a question. And what we really want them to do is to respond with what they're learning about. And when we came through in February, that had changed. So students said, I'm learning about Henry Ford, and here's why he is important. And while they were also doing the writing, they were taking something away. In grades 9 through 12, students spend time in text. Students extract text-based evidence to support their ideas. Students are frequently prompted in class discussion to share text-based evidence. And student tasks and graphic organizers reiterate the expectation and provide exemplars to students. So those were some commonalities. And I'll need to explain this chart to you that TNTP provided. So it goes through the 3 core actions. So the darker the color, or the brighter the color, the better it is, the more things are happening. So in the first core action, in grades 3 through 8, the lessons predominantly focused on high quality texts. So in the first visit, 91% of the classrooms were found to do so. In the second, in February, 92. Occasionally when we wander through rooms and are there for a short period of time, it may be the point in the class where a text isn't out or present, and if it's not out and students aren't actively engaging in it, it isn't counted for that item. For core action 2, this is the one where we're looking to see if the questions and tasks align with the standards and build content knowledge. In the first visit, there were 2% of the classrooms got a yes. And then we saw that 40% of the classrooms in the first visit mostly did that. In February, we see that we're shrinking that not yet, and that more classrooms are doing this to some degree. More are definitely doing it, and then more are somewhat doing it. And then in core action 3, who's responsible for the thinking and who's driving the thinking? We can see in site visit 2 that there was an increase there as well. So we are on track to continue improving in those areas, and core action 3 is very much tied to core action 2. So if the tasks aren't challenging enough, or the questions, it's really hard for students to get deep into thinking and to create. So there's definitely a connection there. And here's the Methuen High School version of the same items. So 9 through 12. And we can see that it's pretty similar in core action 1. In core action 2, with the questions and tasks, there's improvement in the classes that seem to have made this part of their routine or the norm by mostly or definitely doing this. And then in core action 3, we saw more classrooms, again, mostly or definitely doing this. So when I did the debrief with the consultants on a virtual call, we were talking about how some of the classrooms in grades 3 through 8 were working on the end of unit modules for the EL curriculum, which is what is supposed to be happening, and it's the curricula we're implementing. But because the text wasn't out in the way they expected it to, they couldn't rate that particular class. And that was the case in some situations at the high school. Although text was out, it wasn't used in the way that we thought was most fruitful in some areas, but it was predominantly high marks at the high school. So here's just a little bit more on core action 2, which is where we're really focused right now. And again, it's not just that the tasks are on grade level and are challenging, but it's the order in which they're presented to students can have a lasting impact as well. So this just speaks to some of the pieces of what we're looking for. So for instance, it's one thing for students to include details or supply evidence, but when they're supplying evidence to drive their own idea, or they're asked to make a thesis statement or a claim that's derived from their own thought instead of one that's provided, that's a much deeper level of understanding. Author's craft is something that we talk a lot about too. So it's one thing to notice figurative language being used in a text, but it's another to think about why the author would choose to employ or integrate that type of language in order to communicate their deeper message. Okay, I'll pause there before I get into the next part of 1.
Going back to the bright spot slide, did they, that's great, I like that they call out all those positives. It all sounds fantastic, but did they leave recommendations for our non-bright spots?
Yes, our non-bright spots center around core action 2. So here. And so it's important because they're also our PD providers. So what we focus on in PD and what we focused on most recently on Friday was derived from what we saw in this February walkthrough, which talked about core action 2.
Okay. The core action slide, there was, so on the first one, nope, the chart with the bar graphs.
3 through 8.
Yes. Well, both of them.
Okay.
There's improvement on, I think, generally all of them. Did they leave any inclination of what improvement they would expect to see? Are we on course with what's expected? Are we ahead? Are we behind?
Yes, we're on course with what's expected, and they give us incremental goals as we go throughout the year. This is our last year with TNTP, so as part of this year's contract, there's 3 half-day sessions, which are spending with myself and the humanities supervisors, so we can make incremental goals going forward, and we can continue to use the walkthrough tool and think about how we're going to maintain the effort.
2 more. How far apart were the visits?
The first was Thanksgiving-ish.
Yeah, ballpark is fine. I don't need dates.
November-ish, and then February.
So,
And they'll be back again.
all right. So when you say not used in the most fruitful way, do we have a cap in place to address that? Corrective action plan, sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I will say that sometimes the texts that are used are part of the curriculum, but they're supplemental pieces that might be used in the wrong setting. So for instance, if we see a teacher using a text that's focused on a particular standard that's meant to be a targeted intervention, and they bring it into the main ELA lesson when it's not necessarily the time to use that, they wouldn't get counted as using the high-quality text. So thinking about the time, the place, the order, and sticking with what's provided in the curriculum, I think are all things we've been reiterating. Also, at some of the common planning time meetings, TNTP has done some really targeted virtual sessions with particular grades, so teachers across the district can log on and hear that message again.
I guess for me, something I'm always interested in seeing is when we're noticing, I don't want to call it a deficiency because it doesn't, I don't think that accurately portrays what it is. But if we have something that is, let's stick with your words, not the most fruitful, if we have a corrective action, if we have a plan on how we're going to get it into our little cornucopia of fruit, that way it's, we have a plan and we know how we're tracking, it's measurable and attainable and all that good stuff. That's just something I would look for in this situation and really any other situation of a similar nature. But I'm good.
Thank you. Anybody else? Member Keegan?
When TNTP does their walkthroughs, do they look at any of the special ed classrooms where they're doing small group, kids who have small group reading on their IEPs for ELA? Are we looking at any of those classrooms for improvements and suggestions, or are we just looking at gen ed classrooms?
We go through a number of inclusion classrooms where special ed teachers are co-teaching. When they first came in to the district, we did go through some reading enhancement classes, which are separate. We did go through some English learner classes. I'm not sure when they first came if we did sub-separate classrooms.
We have not gone into sub-separate classrooms with TNTP. It's really focused on the general ed curriculum and classrooms and inclusion. So we do see, because we've been there, so we do see, I know a couple of the walkthroughs we went on, you see the small groups being pulled out. There is, TNTP will go and visit to see, as long as they know that's happening from the same class. Does that make sense? It does. Yeah, so if they see any co-teaching happening or small groups being pulled, they will inquire in those settings, yep.
Is there, just based on our numbers for special ed classes and their reading rates, can we get them to look at the special ed classrooms to make suggestions to improve those reading rates? Because we're seeing deficits a little later on in the packet.
I think for us, that would be one of our next steps, is to actually look at English learner pullout and special ed pullout, because those focuses are not going to be what you see here. Okay. This is a little bit different because it's looking at the whole on grade level curriculum, what the expectations are, right? So we really have to set the stage with them. What do we want? What are our goals for them to actually help us? I'm not even sure TNTP is the right group, but that is something, I think when we talk about the SOA plan, that's the deeper dive we have to make in the next 3 years with those two subgroups for sure. What is it we're looking for and who can help us sort of map that out, if that makes. It does. Okay, you're welcome.
Oh, sorry. Member DeZoglio, I'm asleep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I love hearing about all this data and how everything's improving. Just coming from my perspective, as when they mean by expectations student provide evidence, is that for checking for understanding? Is that because where I teach, providing evidence, expectations, that's us calling for checking for understanding. So I'm just trying, that's why I wrote the note earlier, to see if that is what they're trying to see, like they understand how the teachers are teaching it. They can provide where whatever, it's just content or slideshows or whatever they're providing, that is their checking for understanding the material.
I think that's a byproduct of doing this, is certainly it's a checking for understanding. I think it's really routine for our students to know that they need to have supporting evidence and to look for details. Now we're on the level of having students try to self-assess or evaluate what their strongest piece of evidence is and how to order and weave that into a paragraph.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm still in objective 1, but this is just the second half of it. Okay, so last time I presented.
So we had asked them to turn you down a little bit because it felt like your mic was super loud. But apparently there was no middle ground.
I'll lean back. All right, so screening data, last time we presented by grade level in school. And we got a little curious about if we broke that down further by student group, what we would find. So we have been doing that. I'll share a couple of slides with you. And we understand these are a couple student groups that DESI recognizes. Within each student group, there's a lot of variation. It's not that every student is the same within this group, so there's still a lot of variables, but it does give us some more information. Okay, so this is a similar display to what you saw last time, which was just by grade level in school, except this time I pulled out the English learner student group and compared it to the students that are not in that student group as recognized by DESI. And you can see by grade and by school that we had some disparities there between groups, which I'll get to later when I talk about the SOA plan as well. But just to clarify, the percentages you see are the number of students in that group reading at or above grade level. And in parentheses, that is the number of students testing that fit within that group. So you'll notice that when we're looking at this, the English learner slide, as the grade level increases, we have fewer students reading at grade level or beyond in the English learner group. So simply because the text complexity in Lexile gets higher as students get older. And so when someone comes into the district, we have a number of English learners that are in their first or second year in a Massachusetts school when they come into the district and quickly need to become proficient in English and then get transitioned into their mainstream class, which might be grade 8. That's a big learning curve and that's hard. So we're working on having some acceleration there to help students get up to pace even quicker. But again, the CGS is the school that houses the newcomer program, K through 8. Some other schools do have a couple newcomers who chose not to take part in the Excel program at the CGS. But primarily at the Marsh, Tenney, and Timony, you would have English learners who are what we would call level 2 through 5 in proficiency. So they're a little higher in terms of proficiency. And I'll show you the next slide, and then I'll ask for questions. Okay, so this is the same setup. And this is the students with disabilities student group, and then the students that would not be classified by DESI in that category. So again, the percentage of students reading at or beyond grade level, and the number of students who tested within that grade and category. So again, not to say that all the students in the students with disabilities student group have a reading goal. It might be something that's different and does not impact their reading ability, yet that is the group as it's recognized by DESI, and we notice some concerning disparities in both of these slides that we're going to work on further. Okay, I'll pause there.
Member Keegan?
Just for clarification, does the students with disabilities on this slide include 504 students or just IEP students?
IEP students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Member Shabilia? No, Maxwell. No, Member Maxwell, sorry.
So I'm concerned that the TNTB reviews are being portrayed as improvement when they're a hired group to help us get a better idea of how things are gonna get better, not necessarily that it is making improvement. And with the numbers that we have here, it's kind of hard to base them off of anything when it's just off of assessments that we're giving and not state standards, because state standards are significantly different through DESE than they are through our rating system or whatever this is called. I'm not sure, but the state standards where we're meeting expectations aren't even close to us in our district meeting expectations, and this was as of September of this year. So I just don't understand where the disparity is coming in.
Are you talking about MCAS, ELA MCAS scores?
Achievement levels and MCAS scores, yeah. I mean, it's meeting expectations in math and English. So if we're just talking about English, they have sections where it says meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, not meeting expectations, and they don't compare to our numbers.
Yeah, the MCAS exam measures different standards than what we're talking about, literacy and reading in these slides here. And there's also writing components. So for ELA, it's reading, writing, listening, speaking, language. The English learners also take the access test, which might be a different way of measuring their proficiency in English. We're just looking at the screener here. I will say that our MCAS scores do mirror what we're seeing in these last two slides in terms of student groups with disparities in terms of achievement and growth.
Okay. Yeah, I just saw some concerning numbers through the district profile on DESE's website than in comparison to ours. So I just wanted to get an update of that. And I understand that TNTP comes in and gives us objectives and things to get better and improve, and I just don't want it to be portrayed as improvement when it's to help us improve. It's not necessarily improvement, the group itself.
Well, there is incremental improvement, which we're going for. To say that we're done, absolutely not, and they wouldn't say that either.
Right.
But since when we first started focusing on this, and when they started visiting our district, we have seen it trending in the right direction in terms of what we'd like to see in the classroom, which we hope through that experience in the classroom and strong instruction would transfer into an improvement in test scores.
Okay.
Member Shabilia?
So on that first chart, I flipped the math. So doing it out, I guess my biggest question is what is different about the Timony that is showing that 51% of the students of non-EL are not reading at or above grade level? What is the distinguishing factor that makes the Timony special?
Which grade in particular are you looking at? Because
So
there's some that caught my eye.
I went through and I put it all together,
Oh,
and did it, the
oh,
school as a whole.
Cumulative. Okay.
Cumulatively, yes.
What stood out to me about the Timony, and it went with another idea that I'll share with you in a bit, is that the lower school had a significant number of English learners as compared to some of the other schools, but also that the English learners, there were close to 40% in some of the grades reading at or beyond grade level, which was different than other schools. And I did notice on the non-English learner group, too, that some of their achievement wasn't as high. So that's something that we've been talking about and addressing and looking at, and that's why pulling this data apart sometimes helps tell the story or helps direct our efforts. But I will say the other piece that came to mind is when we were talking about the district's accountability or the school report cards from DESE, the Timony got 4 out of 4 points last year on their English learner growth. And so that coincided with this finding here. So there's something special going on there with that instruction, which we've already been looking into to try to spread. But that came to mind as well.
There's something special going on at the Tenney grade 3 too, because it's one of only 2 places where the EL learners are reading at or above grade level higher than the non-EL. So I don't know if there's any, can we look at that classroom and see, is it just the makeup of the students, or is there something special that's being done there? Because I look at that, and then, to your point, the Timony first grade, you've got 39% in the EL reading at or above grade level, yet only 33% for the non-EL. So to me, I want to kind of poke at those two a little bit and say, so what you, and maybe, you say it's just the makeup of the students, right? Maybe it's just their willingness. Because part of me was looking, I was doing what Dan was doing, and I looked and saw that as you go up the grades, and this bears your point out, I believe, as you go up, so, my mind was focused on grade 3 at the Tenney, and then 59% above or at grade level, and then it drops to 16% for 4th grade. So, part of that could be complexity of the material, I get that, but I would assume there has to be something else there too as well, right? Because that's too statistical a drop to just explain it by saying, oh, the books get tougher, right? So, and they do, but, there might be something to be gained from looking at the grade 3 at the Tenney and the grade 1 at the Timony and saying, what's unique about those classes? Is there something that we don't see in other EL-type classes that maybe we're capitalizing on? Maybe it's just the teacher, who knows, right?
Right.
It could be anything, right? But we might want to dig into that a little bit more and say, how do you get to 59%? That's, as a former bilingual teacher, that's a really good number, right? People will kill me because they'll say, no, Mayor, that's not 80%. 59% for your English language learners is fantastic, right? So I hope we can kind of take a look at some of them and say, what's unique about this class, sorry.
No, I think this conversation is exactly what we wanted to have, because this, clearly, the deeper you dive, the more questions you have.
Correct.
Which is going to lead us to the Student Opportunity Act data, which is actually going to lead us to what our next strategy plan is, right? So this is, all the questions you are asking is what we're setting up with the Student Opportunity Act plan that we're going to share with you tonight, and hopefully you approve, so that we can, because all of these numbers, as simple as this looks to divide this, Dr. Golubsky and I've lived this sort of deep dive, and you take one grade level, one category, and those 22 students with disabilities each have a unique story.
Okay.
How do you take a deep dive and say, what do these 5 students have similarly? What levels are these Ls that are similar, so that at a building level, at a district level, we actually know which are these sort of the tentacles that you're going on to figure out what we do next.
Yeah.
And so where this really is landed in a place that made the decision for the Student Opportunity Act plan. And I think it is the decision that we have to make, because we don't know all these stories in these categories, and there are a ton, right? And so that's the work that lies ahead, is taking this information, and all the questions you guys just asked is exactly what our hope is with that deep dive, because they are going to all tell a story. And can we make sense of that story that makes sense for us and the students and the work ahead? Because they aren't all the same, and I think that's what makes education so complex. Right? The state says, here, put them all in one category, but those of you who've ever been in a school and have children, no 2 children in a house are the same, never mind a subgroup, right? And so DESE asks us to say, here's a subgroup, figure it out, except, like I said, within a subgroup, you have I mean, every IEP is different, every English learner's background is different,
Right.
every level is different, but yet they're categorized and put all together in one group for the sake of testing, for the sake of reporting, for the sake of accountability. So, I say all that because this is, all the questions you have is the setup and all the questions we have for our next steps.
Hold,
Go
can
ahead,
I
Member
just
Keegan.
finish off? Member Keegan? Sorry, I want to make sure because either I didn't ask the question right or I didn't understand the answer. One of the two. When I look at the Timony and I put it all together cumulatively, of the 885 students accounted for under the non-EL, I see that 49% are reading at or above grade level, which tells me 51% aren't. For the Tenny, 57% of the 958 are, which tells me 42.5 aren't. 61% of the 816 at the Marsh, which tells me 39 aren't, and very similar numbers at the CGS. I guess I don't understand why they aren't closer aligned. Like, I would expect to see a disparity. I know that geographically Methuen is a broad spectrum of socioeconomic differences, but what is making the rate at the Timony so different? And if you answered it the first time, I'm sorry, it
Probably
didn't
10
make
different things, as you just
sense.
said. I mean, I'm not going to answer for her. She's going to have her own answer, but these are all the things that we are asking because we also have churn rates in Methuen that are very high, meaning I have students who, churn rates are what Desi, are students moving in and students moving out. Who accounts for one of the things that we've always been interested in of this 800 and whatever number you said?
885.
How many have been with us since kindergarten, right? How many have been with us since we usually be able to test, right? MCAS testing, how many have been with us since 3rd grade to 10th grade was always a cohort I was very interested in. We still are. Desi, you still give us those numbers. Now we have to calculate it ourselves a little bit. But those are still some of the questions we have. The last 2 years, the Timony saw the highest rate of increase of new L students to the country and to the state, right? So there is a role in that. Where is that? Right? Where does that play a role in here? So
There's-
there are questions.
Separate columns though, right? We carved out the L students, we have non-L and L. So you're saying that there's an influx of L students to the Timony and it's got the greater portion of the 4 schools.
Right.
I don't know, we'll go to the SOA and we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we don't, I don't have an answer for you to say
No.
tell me the one thing is the difference, right? We are diving into instruction, we are diving into data, we are diving into assessment and accountability for our staff and our students. Chronic absenteeism plays a role. I mean, there's so many factors that we have to look at each tree so that we can say, at the Timony, these are the 3 highest reasons that we can determine based on us trying to answer all the questions you just asked. Here at the Tenny, it might be 3 totally different reasons. At the Marsh, what is the impact? At the CGS, what is the impact, right? And where do we go from there? That's as much as we'd like to see consistency at all the schools, because of course that's absolutely, because we're giving the same curriculum, the same access, the same schedule, same support staff, same class sizes, right? What is the difference? What is making that difference? And unless Dr. Golubsky has a finite answer, I don't have that finite answer. And I think that's what we are trying to, every time we look at more data, it brings up more questions. That's the nature of our work and our jobs. And sometimes it feels like we're chasing our tail. As soon as we figure one thing out, that group of kids, then they don't stop for us, right? They keep getting promoted and leaving grammar school and going to the high school. So, we don't have the luxury of all this time to try to figure it out. But we are working as fast as we can and hard as we can to take these deeper dives. I mean, there is, support and work and things that we have in place that are consistent in all the buildings that I know we feel very strong about with curriculum, expectations, accountability. So if that's all there, what's happening next, right? What is that next step? I do want to kind of see that. What's the chronic absenteeism we're talking about? What impact does that have? there's all those, there's a ton of factors that go into this, but you're asking all the same questions we are with no magic answer. You know, it's the work that we do day in, day out.
I will say too, when TNTP, they send us the report, they also meet with each humanities supervisor individually and give them school-based data and focus points to grow, and each of the 4 are different in their own way. So we do an overview overall, and then we cue in on different aspects. A few years ago, it wasn't the case that all teachers were using the same material with the consistency that they are now. So now that we have that put aside, we can go to the next variable and try to figure out what's happening from school to school. But it's that investigation that we're always thinking about.
Madam Vice Chair.
I just have a clarification question.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do Ls become non-Ls? And, you know, like, as they progress through the grades, we're actually looking at different students, not kids who have always been an L. Is that correct?
That's correct. So on the access test, which they take January, February, and we get the results in April or May, if they achieve a certain threshold, which is 4.2 and 3.8 in terms of the composite and literacy, in the past, they would be eligible to exit out of L status with the agreement of the team, which would be their teachers, administrators, and having no other concerns. DESE just changed that to say that reaching those thresholds on the access test automatically make you what we call a FEL, a former English learner, and that students could go back to L in the future if teachers felt they needed more support. But that's what the designation is there. So that's another layer to unpeel when we're thinking about this, because the rate at which students fell or become FEL varies, and because of a number of variables too and factors.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I didn't include FELs in the English learner category. So there are FELs in the non-English learner category. So as Dr. Kwong mentioned, Timney and Tenney have a significant number of non-newcomer English learners. So in those non-English learner student groups could be former English learners. There are definitely a large percentage of students whose first language is not English, even if they are not classified as English learner based on their screeners.
Member Maxwell.
My only other question is you say that we have the same curriculum, we have the same demographics, we have all, maybe not demographics, but we have the same things across the board in the district. Are we looking at the success rate of the teachers or just the schools? Are we looking at the faculty, or are we looking at?
We're looking at all of it,
Okay.
by teachers, by grades. MCAS allows us to do that too, write trends over years. All of that comes a deep dive. Yep. Great questions.
Okay.
Okay, this is the last literacy objective slide. So media center updates. Okay, so in early March, we have a library consultant from Follett who came up from Connecticut and toured all of our media centers for the purpose of advising on what she felt might be the best layout for the space. She thumbed through a lot of the books in our current collections, helped us plan going forward what the timeline would look like, and that was a really exciting time, and she enjoyed seeing the spaces and talking through that with us. It was also nice because this particular consultant led the refurbishing of all the Lowell Public School libraries just a couple years ago. So she's familiar with the area and had done 17 buildings. And she was raving about the size of the spaces, and it was really encouraging. She did say the hardest part would be the weeding of the materials because there are so many books. But she gave us some great advice in terms of how to activate our catalogs, and she could tell the age of our collection. She gave me some training materials to train our weeding teams, which the first line will be student weeders. So National Junior Honor Society students, student council, SAD groups, and some volunteers are going to help me lead the charge and have students go through. And then my plan is, we'll see how far we get with that. I'd like to have it all done in April, and we might offer some weeding nights for parents who enjoy lending a hand and would like to come and help out. We're also going to select and order the shelving. And then while this is going on, Follett is curating collections for us. And they'll be able to activate our existing catalog once we've weeded and cross those two lists to come out with what they think might be the best for our students. And that's for us to review. And then once we have collections ordered and shelving ordered, Follett would come out and shelve all the new books. Everything would be labeled, added into our system, ready to go. They take the boxes and trash with them. I think in Lowell, they said they were able to shelve and set up each library, and it took them 4 days, and then they were gone. And then we'd be ready with new collections that are nice and fresh and ready for students to use in the start of the school year. So that's the plan there. Okay, moving on to objective 2. If there's no questions on libraries. Oh, sorry, Member DeZoglio.
Hi. So that's awesome, especially the fact that parents will come out and do the collections as well. But I was wondering if when we do activate certain collections, one of the ideas that parents also came up to me and talked to me about they would love to see what type of collections we are thinking about ordering, and kids could come out and see what collections also and see if there are selections that they would prefer. Just because we were already thinking about having them come and clean out the library with us, they should also think about what they would want to put into the library. So is there any way we could do that also in May as well? So that maybe parents' night to possibly come and see the possible collections that we're possibly activating?
Yes, they're going to be large collections, so we won't necessarily have the sample of books here,
Yeah.
but we would have a list that we'd be able to share, maybe a Google form with student suggestions. But high-interest reads are certainly a priority, and those that represent our students, and also some nonfiction as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Member Dinniman.
Dr. Glab, I'm kind of late to this party, so could you just walk me through what's going to happen in September? What the big picture is, how the students will be able to access when? I know in some of the libraries, there are classes. How are you going to work around all that? I think it's a wonderful opportunity, but could you just help me see how it all comes together in September?
Yes, and in the library space itself, or media center space, we are prioritizing and trying to preserve open space for students to work and collaborate. So ideally, I have to price this out, but we plan on having tables where students can sit and work together, still maintaining a space for PD, for teachers can sit and gather. We envision a K-2 area of the space being designated for those grade levels where they can reach books with book baskets, large rugs where students can go and hear their teacher read. So that would be like a separate little nook that we've identified in each school. We are fairly confident we'll be able to move the classrooms that are currently inhabit the media centers into other spaces, more traditional classroom spaces, which would free up room for shelving. But I think the shelving we have in a number of the schools, we'd be able to repurpose and purchase others. In terms of the staffing of that position, that will be coming out in the budget proposal to you pretty soon. But we are looking to have a full-time staff member in the media center space. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Go ahead. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to objective 2. And we have the Director of School Mental Health and Behavioral Services, John Crocker.
Hi, everyone. So, happy to share some new data that we've secured through our spring screening. If you could go back one slide, thank you so much. So these data represent comparison between fall 23 and our spring screening. So the kind of overarching report out here is that we're continuing to see growth. The past 3 years, we have seen some very significant growth compared to what occurred after the pandemic. So you'll see that moderate and severe are decreasing across 5 through 12, across anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress. I have included in here all of the charts from the past 9 years, just to be able to get a strong sense of the trajectory of these data. On the second slide, you'll see a couple key data points that we wanted to track over time. We've in fall 21, we saw that 18.4% of students scored in the severe range on at least one measure. That represented a 312% increase compared to previous data points. We have seen that shrink down to 11.4%, so that's a 7% growth over the past 3 years. That represents very significant gains in that category. Additionally, students who endorse a question of self-harm or suicide, that the group of students that are endorsing that question has shrunk by about 4.5% over the past 3 years. So we are continuing to approach the pre-pandemic levels and make gains in a way that is significant and shows the hard work of not just counselors, not administrators, not just teachers. You don't move these data without having everyone pull in the same direction. So this represents a fully realized system of supports across all tiers. I will not go into the specifics on every single one of these graphs. If you want to take a peek at them and look at the trajectory, again, growth across 9 through 12, 5 through 8. You're going to see that there is an exchange between moderate and mild, or mild and no concern. It is not a perfect growth, but it is growth in the right direction. Moderate and severe are decreasing. No concern is increasing. Yes. So I'll use as an example the anxiety 9 through 12 data. So you can see on the far left-hand side, under the severe categories, that bar chart in green, it's in the middle. That represents a point where we saw a massive increase in anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress. That is when the pandemic hit. And since that time, we continue to see gains in the right direction. Severe going down, moderate going down, and on the far right-hand side of the graph, that's the no concern category. You can see that continuing to go up. We projected that we were going to see, at the beginning of this process, fast gains moving into slower gains. After the first year, we corrected our thinking there and recognized that it was going to be slow gains into some fast gains and then back into slow gains. And I think that that's what we're going to continue to see over the next several years. If you take a peek also at the comparison between grades 5 and grades 6 through 8, that represents a few more slides, Lisa. There we go. This is a category of data that we were focusing on in the fall because we noticed that grade 5 was a group of students that for sure were impacted by the pandemic at an increased rate. So we wanted to just keep an eye on that category of students. We did ultimately make some moves relative to our system of supports. One of those moves was to push Cartwheel down into grades K through 8 to provide additional support services to students in the elementary and middle school grade bands. In addition to that, we sent a message loud and clear to everyone that that was a group of students that was going to need additional support, so providing additional group and individual services to those students. So we are happily seeing that the delta between fall and spring is shrinking. Ultimately, the students that were most impacted, those grade 5 students, we're starting to see growth at a higher rate for those students compared to grades 6 through 8, which represents a step forward in our process of trying to achieve growth at a faster rate for a more impacted grade level of students. You can see that that delta is changing at a higher rate for the 5 through 8 post-traumatic stress data compared to anxiety and depression, but still both categories we're seeing that level out. So ultimately what you would want to see is that those fall and spring, or the delta would ultimately be reduced to 0, meaning that they were on par with grades 6 through 8. We do expect that there's a bubble that will continue to move through. Our students in grades 5, students in grade 4, when we think about where they were when the pandemic hit, what grade levels they were in, and what instruction and support they missed as a function of the time in which the pandemic hit, that is going to be, those grade levels will need to receive continued support at a higher rate. So I will pause there.
Member Shabilia.
So, tying back to goal number 1, it would be interesting to see how these numbers relate back to the individual schools, to see how that correlates with reading.
Sure.
Because I could imagine that PTSD and anxiety and all of these other issues are going to impact that. So that would just be something nice to see. My other question is, how much of this is dealt with in-house by your guidance staff in the individual schools versus being sent out to the third-party service and then to a provider in the community?
Sure. The vast majority of the services that are provided to the students generate from the schools.
How do you manage the disparity of service among not only just the counselors in the schools, but school to school?
Could you say a little more?
So I know from my own experience that it very much depends on where you fall in the alphabet as to who you get. And there is a different, I assume it's much like on the academic side where there's a standard, there's a process, there's a, let's call it a program for lack of a better term.
Okay.
But it's being implemented differently. What do you have in place to say that those processes are implemented uniformly by, whether it be someone with the last name beginning with A or last name beginning with Z?
I see what you mean. I appreciate that. So we engage in supervision of the counselors directly, looking at their specific practices, treatment plans they develop, data they collect, the individual cases. So case consult happens all day long, every single day. Supervision is provided directly to them. I provide direct supervision to the counselors across the district, along with Martha Tatro assisting at the high school. So the processes, the systems that you're talking about, the uniformity of our rollout of these programs and services, that's monitored through collection of data, through review of different products of practice that are developed, case consultancy that's done on an ongoing basis. So accountability is baked into the experience of being a counselor in this district.
And the that's probably not the same for all of them, but are your staff, are they LICSWs, are they MHB, what is this, the other one, MHBP?
LMHC,
yeah.
They're all DESE licensed school mental health staff, so school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers, adjustment counselors. We do have some individuals with independent licenses. It varies quite a bit. We have created a staffing model that really honors that the core of what all of these individuals do is the same, that the core training that they receive is the same, and we have invested tremendously in professional development and coaching opportunities to increase their practice.
Would you say that there's the adjustment counselors, because this is like the third time I've heard that term this week, how many are there per school? or is it per grade, per last name, however you have it set up?
Varied different licenses, and purposefully so. We're looking for people with great experience and with a desire to work in a comprehensive system and provide evidence-based therapeutic care. How many per school? That does vary a little bit depending on the school, but we have been aiming for a long time to be 1 per grade level, and we've achieved that at the Timony and the Tenny. Marsh and CGS, we have 7 and 7, I believe. Yeah, and at the high school we have 11.
I may have more questions for you, but I can shoot them to you in an email as they
I did
come up.
I did want to just offer an answer to a question I saw at the last meeting around Care Solace. There's a question around the description of inbound interactions and communication saved.
Yes.
So I just wanted to provide a quick, it's pretty simple. Inbound interactions ultimately is just referring to community members contacting Care Solace. So that's time that Care Solace is spending coordinating cases with a community member who's called them. The communication saved, that's Care Solace communicating with providers, with families. Ultimately, they're generating that communication, and that is time that they're calling, texting, engaging in web, like a Zoom call, on our behalf to coordinate care.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Vice Chair?
So I noticed that the K2 data went up, not down.
It did.
And I'm wondering what kind of preventative skill building are you putting in place at that level so that the kids don't get worse, I guess is the best way to put it.
100%. No, I'm glad you brought that up, actually. That is going to be the grade band that you see the greatest variance with when you look at a fall and spring screen, because we do not screen the kindergarten students in the fall. And the reason for that is they need time to acclimate to the technology. So I would say there is a change there. There's a delta there that is representing kindergartners' first go at really understanding how to engage in the screening process. I will say also the first couple months, the first couple weeks, it is absolutely the case that we should expect to see some false positives, and plenty of them. For a kindergartner, they are learning about their affect, emotion. They're learning about mood. They're learning about the scale of emotions. And you can imagine some of the things that happen with a kindergartner where the tiniest little thing is devastating. But that is a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk about the size of the problem and to talk about accessing care appropriately, what's a crisis, what's not a crisis. So there's a tremendous amount of education about mood and about emotion that goes into the screening process, and that process of learning allows for us to get more accurate data over time as students become more skillful around affective identification.
Thank you.
Sure.
Member DeZoglio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So going off of kindergarten, because I was reading that data and how it goes up, and exactly what you're saying, like a kindergarten, subbing a kindergarten, a little tiny thing. So do you do more screenings with kindergartners, or is it the fall and spring just?
Yeah, so it's a weekly screen, once a week. And I will say this, Member Keegan, I didn't exactly answer the question around preventative care. Tremendous amount of care being provided to K4 as well. So whether that is through Tier 1 instruction using social emotional learning curriculum, group-based individual services. But yes, it is going to be the case that we see some spread with that data, but it is a weekly screen.
Thank you.
Member Willett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're making tremendous progress as a school system. And I'm seeing that we haven't reached the high watermark of no concern. What I'm personally concerned about is that when I looked briefly at the House Ways and Means budget and the subcategories, and they have specific grant programs, for instance, for civic education or literacy education, and they have different categories. We don't have a specific category of grants for mental health at the state level. Is that correct?
No, we do have specific categories for grants for mental health.
Okay, so it's not just exclusively Chapter 70.
Correct. That's correct. And we have pursued and secured many of those grants.
Okay.
Yep.
So is that with the current governor's plan, is that under jeopardy too? Because I know Chapter 70 as a group, we've been talking about the cutbacks that's been proposed, and I know civics education is going to be cut, and I know literacy education is going to be cut under the current governor's budget. Are we envisioning, in addition to, under the governor's plan of cutbacks to Chapter 70, are we seeing those mental health grants being cut likewise? Do you see anything in terms of being jeopardized that we would be concerned about?
I appreciate the question. There continues to be federal money that is pointed at this effort. The degree to which that is dispersed to states is decidedly not something I can speak to. How that ultimately is dispersed from states to LEAs to districts is also something that is really not in our purview. But I can say this: money continues to be pointed at mental health from federal, and grants are continually being created for the specific purpose of mental health, and we'll continue to pursue them. We've been successful in securing a large number of grants for mental health.
Okay, so,
As well as an earmark from the legislature.
okay, because I looked at it, perused it very quickly.
Sure.
So we have Chapter 70, which is like the main education account.
That's right.
And there's also a subcategory specifically for mental health services. You can apply as a grant.
That's
And then you have federal grants that are obviously contingent upon the federal government.
Right.
Is it possible for the next meeting just to have like a memo of what the grants are from the federal and state level?
So they're all listed on our grants sheet, so at the next business meeting, we can, between Dr. Golubsky and Mr. Crocker, we can highlight the ones that we do receive that are state and federal grants specifically for mental health.
Okay.
If that makes the
Yeah,
most
that's, I would just, again, just in terms of pure education of, I know we're dealing with Chapter 70, and that's going to occupy our time. And then I noticed like civics education
Yeah.
is going to be cut by the governor. And then also the literacy education is being cut by the governor. There might be other things that the governor has cut.
Yeah, I would say that Mr. Crocker is incredibly skilled at this point of going after every single grant that aligns with the work that we're doing, both federal and state. And we are very lucky. We continue, Representative Hamilton has continued on some earmark money that Representative Campbell started for us years ago. So we are also very fortunate. We have a delegation that supports the mental health work in this community at large. So we can easily, I think, again, point that out in the current monies that we have and what we would expect to continue to go after next year.
So in the current setup, taking aside the Chapter 70, right, and what's happening in Washington and what's happening in Beacon Hill, we don't currently envision any jeopardy to the mental health grants as we foresee it.
I don't think we could guess, I don't,
But we don't, okay, the breakdown would be helpful.
yeah, the way we see it at this point, no, but, anything
Yeah.
could change. But we can certainly identify those for the April 8th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Mr. Crocker before we move on? Thank you, Mr. Crocker, very much.
Okay, we're on to Objective 3, which is where we're trying to provide students from historically disadvantaged groups with equitable access to an excellent education. At our discussion during the last workshop, we talked about, and it was requested that more data be provided surrounding these areas. So I pulled a few different pieces that I wish to talk about today. So this first table and the few that follow were pulled from the College Board, who creates the AP exams. So I have from 2019 to 2023, the total number of testers, the total number of exams, because many testers take more than one, and the total number of qualifying scores, which is considered a score of 3 and above. And qualifying score I'll speak to, it's generally the score that most post-secondary institutions will recognize, bless you, as taking an AP credit. So the student who supplies, bless you, a score of 3 or above on an AP exam to a college or university may be comped out of the class and be able to take the next level course. They may be issued credits. We've had a number of students who have started college as second semester freshmen, and a number that have in 4 years graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree due to their AP credits. So we can see, again, we had a little fluctuation around 2020, but we have increased the number of exams being given and the number of testers. And this is the College Board's equity and excellence measures. So this is the number of Methuen High School AP students per grade level who scored 3 and above on an AP exam divided by the total number of students in each grade. So the first row shows the graduating class, which means at any point in their high school career, they had earned a qualifying score, not just taken a class and a test. And then it's parsed out by 12th, 11th, and 10th grade. So certainly, students generally access more AP courses as they progress throughout their high school career, although there are opportunities in 10th grade and some 9th graders as well will take a course. But these are the students who have earned a qualifying score. So last year, nearly a quarter of the graduating class graduated with a qualifying AP score. I'll just do a couple more on AP and then I'll take AP questions. We have a few topics in this bundle. Okay, so this was issued by the College Board as well, these figures. So these are Methuen AP testers by fee reduction status and percentage earning the qualifying score. So unlike DESE, where we have student group information provided from the department, this is not necessarily the same as what we would see as low income, but this is quantifying the testers who received a granted fee reduction and those who did not. And so compiling this data, it led to some interesting discussions with the high school staff about how one would go about getting a fee reduction, what fee reductions are available to us as a district. And what I found out is that from year to year it can vary, but we have a partnership with Mass Insight from years ago, I believe 2008, we started our relationship with that group, and they do offer a subsidy for students in need, as does DESE. So Mass Insight offers for math, science, and English test takers, and DESE for subjects beyond. And so these would be the testers that were granted the fee reduction as compared to those that were not. So we have in the first row just the number of testers, the row below the number of exams that were administered, and then the passing rates. Okay, and this is a slide showing AP testers by race and ethnicity as shared by the College Board. So from 2019 to just last year. So we have growth in all areas, and some groups more than others. And I'll pause there. Any comments and questions regarding AP data?
Shibuya?
So, and we talked about this the last time we went through this. I think this goal is a little bit misplaced because I feel like it's a fundamental element in everything all of us want to do all the time.
Right.
But when looking at that first chart, the one that was in blue, the AP data, and looking at the rest of them, I couldn't get any of the numbers to line up. Like, I could never get back to that number of testers, 469, going through it, because nothing added back up to that number. So I guess looking at that chart, the question becomes, who and how does it tie back to historically disadvantaged groups? So I guess when we do conclude this set of goals, and I guess that what I would just want to make sure that it's clear and it's all able to be tied back, because I like to view myself as someone who's relatively good at making the numbers work, and I couldn't math my way back to the original numbers. And I know that it's DESI information, not you guys, so just when we do finish up, my ask is that we try to make it clear and validated.
And we can certainly pull from our own student information too and cross it against the testers and scores.
That's all I've got for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Member Maxwell, I mean, Willett, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the information, and I think for the most part, we are above the national level for AP examinations. And we're just slightly below the state average for AP examinations. And we had, the high water mark was back in 2021 with 35% achieving 3 or above. But again, if you look overall, we are above the national average, but it's, below the state average. And again, that's a moving target, and I appreciate that. I also value that between the people taking the tests and paying outright versus the testers that were granted a fee reduction, it was very competitive. So if someone comes from a low-income home and they qualified to take the test at a reduced fee, they were in good competition with the other households. So I think that's a sign, too, of the educational value at Methuen Public Schools, that someone might be coming from a low-income home, but they're also competing with their peers that might not necessarily qualify based on income for the grant fee reduction. So that was something I thought was very positive. And also looking at the subcategories based on race and also the advanced coursework, I'm also seeing very positive outcomes. So I understand Member Shabilia, and I defer to the mayor and to the secretary in terms of mathematics. But I think overall, and I appreciate the data because I really requested the data, is that obviously we should be dedicated to every student regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, orientation, background. But it's also very helpful to have this data as well as where can we seek improvements as a whole. And again, historically disadvantaged categories. And it's something that I appreciate the data, and I'm impressed by the scores, and it's something I wanted to just say for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll move on, and then if we have more questions on AP, I can do those as well. So here's a slide on advanced coursework. So we're out of the College Board world, and we're back into DESI here. So this is a category of coursework There's an exhaustive list of courses that DESE labels as advanced. So it would be anything AP, anything that uses Project Lead the Way curriculum, dual enrollment, Chapter 74 approved vocational technical courses, and other rigorous courses such as pre-calculus, chemistry, and I brought the 5-page list in case anyone had a question. But it's for students in grades 11 and 12 who are enrolled in one of these courses and have completed it. So this is our number and percentage of grade 11 and 12 students who have completed one or more of these courses. So the number there is the number of students, and then the percentage is percentage of students within that category that have completed advanced coursework. So for instance, in 2023, of all students in grades 11 and 12, slightly more than half had completed advanced coursework. And so I tried to include the student groups that DESE recognizes and those in which we have students that fall into those categories. So I know when the superintendent and I look at AP data or advanced coursework data, and also in the course enrollment data for grade 9 in particular, we're looking to see if the population of students in courses and those completing advanced coursework reflects the overall school population. And if not, then we dig a little deeper into figuring out why that may be. There is also variation between courses, and you could really get into the intricacies of the data to figure out who is taking which course and why. Here's a slide on grade 9 core course enrollment. So we just pulled the grade 9 courses that we would consider the most popular with grade 9 students. There are a few different students who take some different classes for various reasons, but primarily English 9, CP, and honors. For science, most freshmen take biology, CP, or honors. For math, algebra 1, CP, or honors. Those who did well in advanced math in the K-8 schools sometimes move on to algebra 2. And then world history, CP, and world history honors. So that's pretty much the core components of grade 9 schedules. I didn't get into elective courses. And then we have the composition of those courses. So we have the percentage of students who are enrolled in that course, and then the number of students. So for instance, in English 9 CP, there are 250 students in that class. Of those 250 students, 26% of those students are students with disabilities, 18% are English learners, and 56% are low income. I tried to focus on the student groups that would go into our high needs populations as identified by DESE, and also those with traditionally more significant disparities from the all students group. And this is important because when a student is recommended for a course from 8th to 9th grade, it often impacts their trajectory throughout their high school career. And here are some different subgroups. This is new to your, not in your packet. This one's hot off the press. So different subgroups in their enrollment in those courses. So we can see, for instance, in grade 9 English, 64% of students in grade 9 CP are male, and 60% are Hispanic. In the honors course, 61% are female, and 56% are white. So we also want to make sure that teachers that are recommending from grade 8 are doing so based on hard data that supports student achievement and growth potential, instead of going on a general feel about the student. And we also want to make sure that families are informed of their options and how to access different pathways and curricula. Also, counselors have a big role in that enrollment process. Okay, that's the last slide for the quarterly. Any questions?
Member Willett?
Again, I know it's been talked about previously, is that we have a lot of headwinds in terms of the student population that just recently acclimated to Methuen, the English learners. So if we suddenly have a cutback at the state level, that's going to really impact test scores long-term. You're talking a huge percentage within 2 years. I was looking at that page. And then in the demographics at the back, we've talked about previously how we became a majority-minority district, that the high need increased by 10%, the low-income students increased by 12.4%, students with disabilities increased by 14.9%, English language learners increased by 11.6%, Hispanic population increased by 21.3%. So there has to be a recognition that we want to educate all students. So if the carpet is taken away from us and we're tripped at the local level and millions of dollars are then removed, it's going to definitely impact these core groups. And once you jeopardize the education at the local level, it's going to have a long-term impact. So you could do like a longitudinal study that if you reduce significantly education funding, and I know there's a talk at the state level, and I support it, is to deal with the early childhood education front. But when you cut Head Start, that's a factor, and Head Start was cut at this by the governor. And then the education of the toddlers and the early education front, I support. But then if you're cutting back Chapter 70, obviously there's a disconnect. So you're starting at the beginning stages, but if someone's in grade 3 and 4, their brothers and sisters are gonna have like 25, 28 to a classroom where we average 20 to a classroom. So I think overall, when we're increasing literacy scores and we're reducing students identified with severe mental health issues, and we're doing greater outreach, and like we're doing diagnostic testing of the students, and we're doing these type of sessions of going over the data, all of that is going to be in jeopardy if the governor's budget becomes the reality going into the fall. So I definitely appreciate, as always, the comprehensive information. A lot of times I defer to my colleagues in terms of going to a deep dive on the statistics. But if anybody is a very sombering at looking at the last page, and I think we've done success stories overall, but we also have, like mentioning the Timony, there's something there that's triggering that we need to have further analysis on. But if you look at that shifts in student populations, the Student Opportunity Act is definitely designed for that. The historical commitment to Chapter 70 is definitely designed for that. The Fair Share Amendment is definitely helping us. And if we move away from that and divert money for other purposes, I think it's just a detriment to all the goals we've done since COVID occurred. it would be a shame, I think, overall to our school system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job. Okay. Moving on, Superintendent, would you please start the presentation for the SOA plan, the Student Opportunity Act?
Sure, I'll let Dr. Golubsky catch her breath for a second and just introduce this because she's
Sure.
on again. But so what we have in front of you, I think I prepped you for this at the last meeting, is the Student Opportunity Act plan. This is a requirement of the legislation for the Student Opportunity Act that was passed in 2019 for the money that Member Willett was speaking directly of moments ago. The formula changed, and basically, in the most simple term, I could say, is that the foundation formula was changed to provide more dollars to students who are underserved. So our English learners, our high-need students, which will define all of those groups for the folks watching, and just remind ourselves of those student groups, and low income, and students with disabilities. So it really is the most impactful change in the budget formula for districts like ours, who typically don't have the level of income in towns that some other suburban places do have. And so over time, the promise was that these funds were going to help us build, again, all the things that Member Willett just said, and the things we've been doing over the past 4 years or so here. And before Dr. Golubsky starts, which goes through some of this information, I think it's important to note that, our job, so at our next meeting, we will be presenting our preliminary budget to the school committee with everything in mind that we've already talked about. But our hope and goal is not to lose the things that we have put in place. This may not be the year that we gain a lot more, but I think it's also clear, and you do see tonight, that you might see some different things at the Tenney and the Timony than you do at the other schools, and we have to be ready to have those conversations about the needs of our schools are not always the same. Just the sheer size alone of those two schools. We are over 1,300 in both of those schools, and the CGS and the Marsh are not, they're hundreds below that, right? We're at like 200 to 300 below that in the other two schools. So just the sheer size, just statistically, provide challenges. And so that's our job, right? My job is to put together a budget that does just what Member Willett says and provides support in all areas to all of our students. We will have dialogue over the coming months about what we want to keep, what our reality is, and you as a committee will help us direct and make some challenging decisions, and that's what my team will do. I hope not too challenging, but we're not going to present a budget to you that is going to bring some false hope either to adding more to what we have, right? Our hope is that we maintain, and there are pockets of things that we are going to ask for some things that will make the most sense to you. I think that is our obligation to you to present that to the school committee and the public, that we're not without needs, but we can't be unrealistic and fiscally irresponsible, and so we're not going to be doing that. And again, the whole point of this process is that the school committee, which the budget is a huge portion of your purview, is to have this dialogue and discussion and thoughts and give us direction on what those next steps are, right? We're gonna present to you, we're gonna give our thoughts on what should be next, and then some, and what it means if, right? Lots of those conversations. And then that's what our team does in between those meetings before we actually approve a budget and take it to city council. So we are prepared for that dialogue, and we will be prepared for that at the next meeting. So I appreciate the preface of this because this pertains directly to that work. But I am going to let Dr. Golubsky go through this plan, which I think we talked a lot about with the quarterly update, and so there's not a whole lot of new information here, but really a focus on what this is a very prescribed plan by DESI. This isn't like Dr. Blasky and I sit around in a room and make up like, oh, what are we going to do, and what does that look like, and what's the language, and what's the evidence-based program. This is, here's the list from DESI, and you have to pick one, right? And so we feel really good about it because we have had all this work since the first SOA plan, which was a little less structured. It was a little, I don't know, it was just harder to create the first time that we wrote the plan 4 years ago. At least I know it was. I think I was the one creating it. It just didn't have a lot of structure as to what DESI expected, what the options were, but yet we were required to do it, and we weren't seeing a ton of money then, right? So we had, here's the law, here's COVID, you're not seeing any money, but yet you have to do this because it's law, right? So it's just a little more challenging than this process was for us, and I have to say that pulling some of the data we did, it literally fell into like, well, this makes perfect sense for us. And so I do feel grateful because I think it's going to allow us to really focus on the conversation we had here tonight. So I think you'll see that. I know you've reviewed this, but I think it'll make the most sense to you. We are required by law to submit this plan to DESI by April 1st. I'm also required by law to submit the minutes and the actual vote to DESI with that plan. So the turnaround time was not a lot. They gave us the information probably right after the governor's budget came out, the end of January, to turn all of this around and have it make sense. So I think we're in a decent place because this is the data that we feel is important to our district. You guys have made it clear, the previous committee made it clear, this is the data we need to look at to figure out the why as we continue to move forward and progress.
Thank you. Yep, ready to go. Okay, so here's the Student Opportunity Act plan presentation. On this slide, you can see that this is our 5th presentation of this plan. So we have shared at 2 Senate Council meetings. We shared with our district-wide leaders at the quarterly leadership meeting, and Dr. Kwong shared with parents at the CPAC meeting. So just to summarize what Dr. Kwong had shared, the Student Opportunity Act was enacted in 2019. As part of this act, every district, regardless of how much funding they receive, needs to submit a plan to DESI that outlines the targets for improving disparities in their district between student groups in terms of achievement, and then what their plan is to solve that and close the gaps. So this is our 2nd round of the SOA plan. And here we are. Okay, so just to clarify, this is different, very different from the district improvement plan or strategy plan that is more comprehensive in terms of everything we're doing to support students who fall into particular student groups or not. This is just a snapshot of a few particular ways that we plan to support students in the groups that we identify. And the keys to tipping the scales, so to speak, and to see an increased improvement in those areas. So this is just a small piece of the pie, but a really important one that we plan to focus on. So here are the components of the SOA plan, just so you're aware. So we're first tasked with identifying disparities in both learning outcomes and opportunities for student groups. Second, we're to identify specific evidence-based programs which we intend to implement or better. There might be things already in existence to reduce these disparities. And as Dr. Kwong said, we're provided a list from DESI from which to choose. Next, we need to outline the type of funding that would be used to implement the plan. So it's not to be seen that just SOA dollars would fund this SOA plan. SOA dollars go into the general fund, And then we pull from grants, and I'll get into that later, all different areas to support the plan to decrease the disparities. Then we're tasked with establishing targets. This year, DESE established targets, which they asked us to follow. So that was done for us. And then finally, we need to talk about plans for engaging families and measuring our efforts from year to year, as it is a multi-year plan. Okay, so this was the slide that Member Willett was speaking to regarding the shifts in student populations, which led us to determine, in part, that the English language learners and students with disabilities are the two student groups on which we would like to focus. So over the past decade, the district enrollment overall has decreased by 400 students, and the white student group has decreased by 24%. The Hispanic student group has increased by 21%. English learners increased by 11.6%, and students with disabilities increased by 14.9%. And then on the second portion here, I think it was really important to note the changes that have come about just since the first SOA plan was presented and adopted. So in just 3 years, our low-income students increased by 12.4%, and high-needs students increased by 10%. So, and I'll define high needs at the end. English language learners increased by 8%, and students with a first language other than English increased by 5%. So the high needs student group accounts for students who are English learners, low income or economically disadvantaged, and also students with disabilities. So if you fall into one of those three categories, you fall into the high needs student group. Some students fall into multiple categories within that group. And I just wanted to paint the picture of the English learners in Methuen Public Schools. So this is based on the 22-23 school enrollment data. 34.2% of English learners at MHS were within their first 2 years in a Massachusetts school. Often, it's their first experience in a school in the United States. 49.7% of English learners at the CGS are within their first 2 years in a Massachusetts school, so nearly half. And the reason for that is in large part because the CGS houses that K-8 newcomer program. And then at the Marsh, Tenney, and Timony combined, there's an average of 9.1% who are still within their first 2 years within a Massachusetts school. And this heat map was provided by DESE. I took some snapshots of portions that I thought spoke to what we are focusing on today. So we have the 2023 data for MCAS meeting and exceeding. So just like when we look at reading data, we look at students reading at grade level and beyond. Here we're looking for students who are meeting the academic standards and exceeding them. And then on the right-hand side, we have growth, the growth percentiles. So when we're looking at student data, we're looking at achievement, but also growth, both very important. So the darker the cell indicates the greater disparity from the all student groups. So it's a nice visual to illustrate on the meeting and exceeding. So I would say that's the achievement side. That in terms of ELA, at least in grades 6, 8, 10, the English learners, there's a great disparity from the all student rate, and in grade 8 ELA for students with disabilities. In terms of math, we see a great disparity in grades 6, 8, and 10 for the English learners, between English learners and all students, and then in grades 8 and 10 between students with disabilities for math and the all students group. And even in those cells that I didn't name in particular, that are colored in that pink color, the student group still does not meet the all students rate. And then on the right-hand side, that's the student growth percentiles. And I just isolated those student groups that we're looking at. In ELA grade 10, we see great disparities in English learner and students with disabilities, both in English and math, as compared to the all students group. Here's some more data that's speaking to why we identified these two groups as being the focus of the SOA. So this is the percentage of 9th graders passing all courses. And it's really important, just like I commented before about important to have students in grade 9 placed in the appropriate courses so that they end up in the pathway or they understand the opportunities available to them in subsequent years. It's really important for grade 9 students to earn as many credits as possible and to end that grade 9 year with full credit load. It exponentially increases the chances of them meeting their next academic milestone, which is graduation, when they finish their freshman year with all their credits. So we can see in the blue bar, that's the all student rate as compared to the English learner rate in green. And then our 5-year graduation rate, which is older data from 2020 and 2021, is provided by DESE. And then students with disabilities, we see also there's a disparity in terms of passing grade 9 classes and the 5-year rate. We also included the slides that we already spoke about tonight regarding the breakdown of the screener scores. And so hopefully that points you to understanding why we chose those two student groups. And then in terms of the evidence-based program as offered by DESE, the one that we chose to focus on to address these disparities, we thought really articulated exactly what we needed. And the phrasing in italics is the DESE phrasing. So use the MTSS process to implement academic supports and interventions that provide all students, particularly students with disabilities and multilingual learners, equitable access to deeper learning. That's funny, you should ask. Okay, so here's an overview of MTSS in case you're unfamiliar. So MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Support, and it's a comprehensive continuum of evidence-based systematic practices to support a rapid response to students' needs with regular observation to facilitate data-based instructional decision-making. So in other words, what we're trying to do there is use systematic processes to examine data and to make sure that students are growing in real time and learning. And if that's not the case, we're redirecting and trying a different pathway and using data to inform our instructional decision making. So the tenets of a framework, the MTSS framework, is that all students are capable of grade level learning. And that's really important. And it's just a matter of the type of support and the amount of support that students need in order to access and perform at that grade level standard. MTSS is rooted in proactivity and prevention and utilizes evidence-based practices. I will also say that MTSS is not only to support the students in the process, but also the educators who are maybe having a tough time finding how to support a student, and it provides the opportunity to confer with colleagues and use data to inform the decisions that are made. And also the degree of support given to students is based on their needs. So just like it's important to scaffold learning, It's also dangerous to over-scaffold learning because then we don't get to those core actions 2 and 3 that we talked about in Objective 1. And it's really important that this occurs school-wide and that we have stakeholder collaboration. So this would be an example of a program that we have in place, but we think we can do better with. And so that's why we chose to focus on this. So these subsets of the elements of EBTSS were provided by DESE. So by selecting this program, we also are selecting these subtopics which we believe in. So the effective use of the WIDA framework to support English learners, both within and without of those programmatic classes. High leverage practices for students with disabilities, collaborative teaching models, and targeted academic support and acceleration. So these are all areas that DESE has identified as being key components of MTSS and those which they wish for districts to focus on who are choosing this program. So where will the money go, both SOA dollars and beyond, to improve MTSS? So we have on our teams in schools who are driving this academic process, we have English learner supervisors and humanities supervisors who are taking the feedback and data from teachers, and they're all meeting together with teachers to discuss next steps, making instructional decisions and supports. And we intend to request, when we submit the budget to you, STEM supervisors to really round out that team. So we have science and math expertise. Professional development. So we had a lot of professional development this year in the ELE department regarding the WIDA framework, and the ELE supervisors spread some PD at department meetings and during CP time on the WIDA framework and how to trickle in our support of English learners in everything that we do in Tier 1 instruction. Teaching multilingual learners, co-planning and co-teaching, which we're actually using some earmark funds to support both. And I'm working with Assistant Superintendent Bozak to support the ELE and Special Education Department and General Ed teachers. We plan to run that in June. High leverage practices for students with disabilities would entail curriculum revision, material adaptation, support staff to maintain and generalize new learning across settings. Targeted academic supports would entail our reading specialists, academic support lab at the high school, after-school homework center at the high school. Acceleration would entail personalized digital intervention tools, vacation summer academies. And these are just some of the general buckets that we see as fitting under these subcategories, but as it's a multi-year plan, we certainly plan to enhance and expand these ideas. So funding sources, federal grants, local funds, and state grants are just some of the ways that we will be able to improve our MTSS. And then I spoke briefly at the beginning about DESE setting the targets. So how do we know if it's working or if it's getting better? So DESE will set a 3-year improvement target, and then from year to year we'll have an incremental growth target as it pertains to our lowest performing students group. So the lowest performing students group entails students who have the lowest academic performance and therefore need the most significant levels of support. So by performance, we're talking about the average of ELA and math scores for MCAS. So this target is new. They didn't use this on the first issuance of the SOA plans. And the idea is that this will provide some consistency between districts. And also, when you're looking at more than one student group, there's so many different ways to parse out the data and so much variation, as we already said, that they felt strongly that this is the best way to do it. Because if these truly are the disparities in your district, the naturally students within these student groups would fall into that lowest performing students group. Okay, so a little bit more on who that is and what this group really means or represents. So it's the lowest performing 25% of students in the ranking average of ELA and math. Okay, so it's for high school and non-high school. The way you figure that group is different for each. So the students, in order to be in this group, have to have been enrolled in the school for 2 consecutive years. So that would eliminate newcomers who are brand new to the district. And they have to have tested in both years if they're not in high school. Okay, so the K through 8s, or 3 through 8s, we're talking about this. We're looking at the results of the current year compared to the same student's previous results. So if we're looking to see if we've met a target and are making growth, we're looking for that lowest 25% of students, and we're comparing how they did in 1 year to the next year. And we're hoping to see growth that matches the DESE target. The high school is a little different because we don't have 2 consecutive testing years since everyone tests in grade 10. So when we're comparing the lowest performing students group, we're really comparing 2 different crops of students. It's the lowest performing group in 1 year as compared to the next lowest performing group in the following year. And here is where we did the presentations. And I zipped through that because we talked about so many pieces of this already. But I will say when we did the presentations, these other dates to these other groups, we had an email account made where people who were listening and just hearing all this information and seeing it for the first time could digest it and then send questions or comments to the superintendent. And we also asked for verbal feedback and comment. I think we had a few questions, which we're happy to address. So do any of you have questions or comments you'd like to share?
I apologize if this is not one of the questions that I gave you earlier, but MTSS is already in place, and a lot of the things that you said are already in place. What makes you think that we're going to get any different results if we're just going to do the same thing?
It's in place, but we think we can be more effective with it. So I will say one change that we made this year is on Infinite Campus. The superintendent worked with Matt Circa, our data administrators, to open the historical profile so teachers were able to see in years prior documentations of strategies or events that have occurred with the student, and so we're not just spinning wheels from year to year, and we're making progress that way. I think that teachers understand the need to collect the data and are working really hard with the administrative leadership to do that. We want to make sure that what we're recommending as a team for instructional decisions are really strong, evidence-based, and personalized for that student. So just like we talked about before with different students having different needs, I think with some of the items that I addressed earlier that we can be stronger in what we're recommending, sticking to the time frames of what we're recommending and tracking data that way.
Can I also ask, can I add to that?
Yes.
Because one of the things that is challenging, and having lived from the beginning of when DESE identified this lowest performing 25% group, that was another new subgroup that DESE added probably 7 years ago. And it's still a little elusive to us educators because it doesn't come out. We don't get that list at the same time that we get all of the other data. And so it isn't typically a data set that we are hyper-focused on because we don't have it when we get it like halfway through the school year. So oftentimes for us, this is why MCAS is so frustrating, because we get the data after we have the kids already rolling for the school year. This data set is even farther out, and I think it's telling to us they don't have the targets for us right now. So we owe them this plan in April, but we don't know what our targets are. So Desi's like, don't worry, turn in your plan, we'll get you your targets when we get it. So there are some frustrating pieces of this, but for us, I think the difference is exactly what we talked about tonight. There is such a deeper dive. So while we are doing some of these things more globally, we absolutely feel taking a deeper dive and looking at these two subgroups with a fine-tooth comb, right, or lens, no, looking through, whatever, lens, right, that we're hyper-focused on the stories, and we're hyper-focused on this data subset that we really have never been before, because this is different than our first go-round with SOA. They didn't have a subset of data that they absolutely were focused on and are going to, if you would, grade us on, right, and see if we're meeting our targets annually with this plan. So this makes sense because we already have the wheels in place. But like Dr. Lepsy said, there's so many things we feel we could do better, and having the staff in place to start diving deeper, to think about what pieces of MTS are we needing to focus on, what do we need to do better, that we have to do that. Regardless of SOA or not, this is gonna be our next step, right? So this is clearly where our strategy plan has to head, parts of it, right? But this is the hyper-focused part that the state wants us to really look at. Who are these kids? What are their names? Who are they? What are their stories? And where do they fit in this larger picture, right? What grade 3, what group are they in? What's their story, right? And so that's, I think for us, that's been the level of conversation we've been having with people, is it's just taking us not to a global perspective, but really nailing down what do we need to do differently for these two subgroups by grade level, by school, by K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, like, what is it that we have to look at? So for me, I see that, having done this work for many years in this district, there have been a lot of moving targets, and I think having these targets set with the strategy plan plus the SOA, it's gonna only move us in the right direction. It's not gonna happen overnight. There's no promises there, but our team is gonna work as hard as we can to have all these things in place and figure out what we need to do and do better.
Thank you. The one thing I want to say is that I'm encouraged by is that you're actually acknowledging in this plan that all students are capable of grade level work.
100%.
That is a
How do we get there?
huge change and about face from when my kids were in elementary school. My son was not expected to do grade level work, and it was discouraging to me. And that has changed since he hit high school, and it's been huge to see the growth that is capable of a kid when they're expected to do grade level work. And I'm encouraged that we're going to start that in kindergarten and preschool instead of waiting until the kids get to high school. So I'm really encouraged by that one sentence in this entire plan. So thank you.
Welcome.
I don't need this need to vote, so I need a motion and a second to approve the district SOA plan.
So moved.
Second.
Oh, there, Lou. So we got a motion by member DeZario, a second by member Willett. Any further discussion other than what we've already had? Okay, this has to go to roll call, Mark.
Ryan DiZoglio,
Yes.
Mary Beth Donovan Grassi,
Yes.
Lori Keegan,
Yes.
Kristen Maxwell,
Yes.
Daniel Shabilia,
Yes.
Kenneth Willett,
Yes.
Mayor Neil Perry.
Present.
Unanimous. 6 yes, 1 present passes.
Okay, moving on, we have a motion, we need a motion and a second to approve the resolution for chapter 78.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by member DeZario, second by member Shabilia. Discussion.
I'll kick it
Go
off.
ahead, Chief.
So as a body, we received this from our counterparts in Haverhill.
Sorry about
This same exact resolution was brought up and approved in Haverhill. When I last spoke to them, it was going up in Attleboro, Barnstable, Brockton, Chelsea, Holyoke, Quincy, and they're waiting on more confirmations that it is going up and being voted and approved. Upon approval, it's being sent to the appropriate delegations. It's being sent to the governor's office. It's being sent to Massachusetts Association for School Committees. Basically, anybody who's willing to read it, who might have some pull, who can bring to light the, let's call it the error of their ways. So that's where this is coming from. It is word for word, character for character, the exact same as what was brought forward in Haverhill. All I did was control find Haverhill and change to Methuen. So, listen, work smarter, not harder. So that's the objective here in discussing it with Haverhill. Some of it is symbolic, and some of it is kind of a slight pressure. So we're hoping that more districts jump on board and we can get them to fix this in the next rendition of the budget.
Would we be delivering this to our legislative delegation, or are we going specifically to the governor and others like that?
So the intent was that it went to the delegation, it went to the governor, it went to MASC, and after this was over, I was going to ask the knower of all things, Miss Martha, how that happens.
We do that. So
You guys do that?
Miss Martha and your secretary to the committee send it to the appropriate delegations that represent us.
All right,
Yep.
okay,
So it will go to everybody.
Anybody and everybody?
Everybody and then some.
Yeah.
I like it.
Once we sign, we have a clean copy if this passes tonight for you all to wet signature
Yeah,
tonight
I
before
did
we leave.
notice that the date was wrong on this one.
Oh, no.
It says March, oh no, it was corrected, March 25th in the packet, okay.
Okay.
So, any other discussion on that? Member Willett?
On a related topic with the budget memo, has that been relayed to the legislative delegation at this point?
My budget memo?
Yes.
So I have had direct conversations with Representative Hamilton. I have not had direct conversations with the senator yet.
So I
So our
would,
representatives know, not the state senator. I have not had a conversation with Pavel Payano yet.
because I want us to work on dual tracks. I support the resolution because like Member Shabilia said, some of it's symbolic. Some of it deals with doing 3-year look back of inflation. Because I know with the GIC, they do a 3-year average for the premiums. So when we do the fluctuations from 4.5% downward to 1.35%, I think in terms of stabilization, it should be a 3-year average, because back in 2022, the high water mark was 9.1% inflation in this country. So for anybody to indicate that we went from 9.1% inflation down to 1.35% inflation, please explain that to me
Yeah.
step by step.
Yep.
So that was one of the dual tracks. The other one, I would like to have our budget memo, because I think we're ahead of the curve. Normally, when we present the budget, that information's included. But I think if we send the resolution to the legislative delegation, we send the budget memo to the legislative delegation.
Well, the only thing I'd caution is that, so the superintendent's going to get a number from the CAFO this week. That will be the city's contribution to the schools. It will be more. It won't make up for the gap, I'm going to say that right now. But I think, the superintendent's going to come in here on the 8th and make your budget presentation.
Correct.
So there's a couple of things that have to happen before I would want to share that budget memo with any of the state delegation, right? There's some numbers that have to firm, right? And some of those will be done by members of this committee. As we walk through the budget workshop, as you remember, right? We're going to go school by school, class by class. It's a great eye-opening experience, right? I just want to be careful. I don't want to promise you something that we need to wait on. I think we need to wait on till at least, the meeting after the 8th, right? So we start to, on the 8th, we'll start to formalize numbers, and we'll get in our heads, okay, this is where we're going. So we technically could say, these are, not finalized numbers, but this is what we're looking at, right? So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does, Mr. Chairman, and I think
That's it, yeah.
someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong, is that the next meeting,
Yeah,
we can have that final version of the budget memo, for the most part.
no, so the only part of that sentence I want to be careful with, remember?
No, that's
Well, that
fine.
is final,
Yeah.
right? You cannot have the final. The final doesn't come until the city council tells the superintendent, this is the number.
No, I mean, let's say, it should say up to date.
Okay.
How about that, up
Yeah,
to
we
date?
can say,
Okay.
this is the number that we're projecting, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We can do that.
Yeah, and, you know, again,
Yep.
from
Yep.
our standpoint.
Yeah.
And then we're going to proceed with the budget, but we also can send, I'm circulating a letter.
Yeah.
That for the next meeting, that should be in time, because it's going to be a moot point if we start to have budget amendments considered at the State
Agreed.
House. And this information should be presented to the legislative delegation, at least on the House side.
Sure.
Before they proceed to file budget amendments or sign on to budget amendments.
Yep.
So I think the next school committee meeting, we should have a formal letter to the legislative delegation. We should have at least an updated version of a budget memo that we can present and include as part of a package.
We can do that.
Okay, so that's, in terms of that, I understand.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have said finalize. I'll
Yeah, yeah,
retract
yeah.
that part of the statement.
I just don't want them to come back and say, oh, see, you guys said you're this and you're that, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think what it is that the local contribution obviously is subject to finalization by the city council. What we're focused on is the differential between a 4.5% down to 1.35%.
Yes.
And I don't want to have the legislative delegation be kept in the dark on this. And there's also, there should be, from the affiliated parties in Methuen,
Yep.
there should be a unified focus on
Absolutely.
the budget as it pertains to Beacon Hill. And then afterwards,
Sure.
focus your resources, if you want to, as part of the democratic process, then you can focus your resources at the local level.
Yep.
But I think it's a little bit unwise to just focus like tunnel vision in terms of Methuen, where we still have an opportunity as a school committee
Yep.
and people affiliated with the Methuen Public Schools to marshal our resources and direct them at
Agreed.
a legislative delegation
Agreed.
because of what happened.
Yep.
So
Let me-
that's would be
Let me tell
my-
you, I'm banging away on the legislative delegation already.
Okay.
So.
All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep. Madam Vice Chair.
I just want to comment on something Member Willett said. I'm a little bit concerned about sending numbers that the city side is going to be presenting for the budget, because the state should be not focused on what we're going to contribute. It's the state
Chapter 70,
number,
correct.
Chapter 70 number. So I don't feel like we should be sending them any numbers that the city says they're going to give us or projects or anything. I think it's completely irrelevant.
I gotta be honest, though. If we send them numbers without the city contribution, they're gonna say, what's your net school spending, right? And that's a question we answer all the time, right? So that includes the local number. So I can tell you that the CAFO, she's probably home wringing her hands and wanting to wring my neck, but she's there, right? So I had to have her go through all the revenue projections for the year, because some of the things that the previous council voted at the end of last have reduced our revenue inflows. Not only that, you look at things like Holy Family Hospital, and I have to sit here and play a waiting game, right? So Holy Family Hospital pays $1 million plus in taxes to the city of Methuen. That's as a for-profit. There is a great likelihood, and I don't want anybody to quote me, that, if it continues to operate, it will be absorbed by a nonprofit. As soon as that happens, that $1 million is out, right? And I just use that as one example. So she's gone through the revenue inflows. She's anxious about them. She always is at this time of year. And now, Wednesday morning, I will sit down with her and go through them, and we will finalize the number and turn to the superintendent and say, here's the number. And the superintendent can tell you, once I give the number, we can talk about all, I never renege on the number. The number is the number, right? So I just think if we give something to our legislative delegation, they're savvy enough that they're going to say, well, what's the net school spend? What's the total amount? What's the city's contribution? So I don't really want to hold it back, if you will. We're going to do like we've always done, better than net school spend.
Right.
Right? And so, to me, this is about a bigger problem that, what was forecast, and I look at the governor, and I want to make sure you guys all understand, I think you do. She's making cuts based on projections, not based on actual revenues. So the actual revenues in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are more than they were last year. They are not matching the projections that were set forth, and that's a dangerous game you play in the budget cycle, right? How aggressive or how conservative you get. So, long-winded answer. I don't see the benefit, and I don't know if you disagree with me, to holding out the local aid number, because it's once it's defined, right? And, we'll stand there and defend it to anybody who wants to talk to it, so.
I don't disagree with it. I think there are two paths that could get very confusing, and
Yeah.
we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
Everybody in my seat and everybody sitting here, and probably every school committee in the Commonwealth, is in agreement that the formula has a flaw. And I think that's the battle with the legislators, right? Because that Chapter 70 number isn't going to change for us.
Right.
Unless it changes, I guess I should say. That's a weird
Would
statement.
be-
But unless something changes now and they do get pressure from enough committees, enough legislators, enough voters,
Yep.
that's really the only wave that's going to make change for this fiscal year. And again, if that happens during the process, wonderful, right? If it doesn't, then we're going to build a budget based on our Chapter 78 number now, the city contribution number that we have. And again, the mayor's right. I've been around too long to know the school committee votes a budget. That can change. That budget can go to the city council. That can change. So there's a process we have to trust and follow. And my job is to advocate, as is yours, for the best quality school budget we can put together that, again, advocating for all students in our schools. That's my job, that's your job, and that's, what I think we'll do collaboratively going through the process. So I do think this resolution, of course, I 100% support it, and it will go out as your secretary. This will go out to every, legislative branch that represents Methuen, for sure. Our entire delegation, the governor's office, lieutenant governor, MASC, it'll go, I'll ask my colleagues, is there anywhere else they sent it that actually
will
would
it?
read it?
It's something else?
Yeah, and just to emphasize that the state has an $8.2 billion stabilization fund, a rainy day account, which is like the third largest in the country, only behind California and Texas with massive populations. So when we go into the budget deliberations and we have a reduction in the inflation of the foundation for Chapter 70, it's not like the state is crying poor.
Right.
They have the third largest stabilization account in the country. And we always been told, whether you're city council, school committee, school administration, mayor, is that you do not tap into your cash reserves for personnel purposes unless it's an emergency
Can
situation.
you say that again?
Yeah, and I read a certain memo that's being circulated, and I can't understand where you do capital expenditures, you pay down debt, you tackle massive projects, you do not tap into your cash reserves, because that impacts your bond rating, it impacts at the state level. So you do not go into your cash reserves to handle collective bargaining agreements or handle year-to-year personnel funding. It's frowned upon by your bond organizations, you don't do that.
Yep.
So my focus at this moment is at the state, because they're resting on an $8.2 billion
it.
rainy day fund, and then we collectively should focus all of our resources at the state.
Amen.
Yeah.
Member DiZoglio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to the budget and everything, the school committees around the state of Massachusetts could write this letter and send it to the legislation. But what I'm requesting our parents at home to start calling your senators and your reps. You vote for them. They are to listen to you, just like we are supposed to listen to you. And if we can be, it's the truth. We are their bosses.
No, I just, you said, we have to, they have to listen to you, just like we are supposed to.
Yeah. And the fact is that, like I've told our senators and representatives multiple times, that I am your boss because I vote for you. So, and these are affecting your children. And I will sit here and I will call our legislators just as much as you will. I will do my job effectively as much as I can. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the ballots that will be cast in a few years, you have more power than us. So I'm asking you all, I will make as many phone calls as I can, but you should too.
Amen.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to approve this. Do we have to go roll call on this, Martha? We can go, right? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And not surprisingly, it carries unanimously. All right, that takes us on to any other business from the committee. I have a couple things. So first and foremost, there's a listening session, the second such one tomorrow night at the Merrimack Valley Golf Course. It's for residents of the east side of the city. I say that because to the residents in the central and west, we will be doing some of the sessions in your neighborhoods, and you're welcome to come out. And the first one at Borelli's was well-attended, and the people couldn't have been better. They asked really great questions. So that's, the second is, so the city, I'm sitting here thinking now, the city council had asked me to ask the committee to have a joint meeting on the 8th. Now, I'm not sure that would be the night to do it because we have our budget workshop, right? Which is tough as it is.
It is tough, and we have negotiations right before that, so we're going to go back to back probably that night.
So do we have a date that I could go back with to, because the 8th is not a city council night, it's a school committee night.
Right.
But the budget workshop, that's too much, right? If we're here till midnight on the 8th,
I can
you
send
pick me up
you-
with a mop.
I can send you and the chair of the
Okay.
city council. Last time, that's sort of how we rounded out potential dates.
Okay,
So I can do that.
appreciate it.
Yep.
And that's everything I got. Member Willett?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Constituent had asked to promote the Timony PTO scholarships.
Yeah.
I believe there's 3 $500 scholarships that will be awarded. It's open to all graduating seniors. They must have attended Timony for at least 3 years, so that's one of the criteria. The Timony PTO, I believe they have a page on Facebook for additional details. Also, reach out to the guidance office. So that's something, if you fit the criteria, definitely apply for the scholarships. There's 3 $500 scholarships.
Great.
And the deadline for applications is going to be April 30th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yep.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, no, it's 3 years.
Okay,
It'll be at the
with no further business to discuss at this time, may I have a motion and a second to adjourn the workshop business portion of this meeting of March 25th, 2024, and go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Member Shabilia, seconded by Member DiZoglio. So pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if any open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, Unit A and Unit C. We will not reconvene into open session at the conclusion of the executive session. Any discussion there? Roll call, Martha?
Ryan DiZoglio,
Yes.
Mary Beth Donovan Grassi,
Yes.
Lori Keegan,
Yes.
Kristen Maxwell,
Yes.
Daniel Shabilia,
Yes.
Kenneth Willett,
Yes.
Mayor Neil Perry.
Yes. Thank you all. The The workshop is adjourned at 9:10 PM.
Good night, Methuen.